Bonjour et bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Hello and welcome to this press conference. I'm Elizabeth Thompson with CBC News. Today with us we have the Honourable Bill Blair, President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, and the Honourable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety. They will be telling us more about the situation. They're providing an update on the situation that we're sitting in Ottawa. Ministers?
Good afternoon, bon après-midi. Thank you for joining us for an update on the ongoing response to the blockades in downtown Ottawa, as well as at other important border crossings in Coutts, Alberta, and in Windsor, Ontario. While each of these three situations are unique, they are linked by a common thread. This is no longer about truckers or vaccines. It's about a very small, angry minority who've decided they can stand in the way of their fellow citizens, whether it's occupying a community or blocking an international border. And that's not how we do things in Canada. Tout d'abord, la situation à Ottawa. Comme je l'ai fait remarquer hier soir lors du débat d'urgence, ce qui a commencé comme une interruption est maintenant devenu une occupation. Des expressions flagrantes de haine au harcèlement et même à la violence, les résidents d'Ottawa ont dû supporter beaucoup trop de choses au cours des 13 derniers jours. Depuis le début, le gouvernement fédéral a été là pour soutenir la ville et la police d'Ottawa. Nous avons fourni des ressources supplémentaires, y compris plus d'agents de la GRC à plusieurs reprises. La GRC compte maintenant 275 agents suppléants et le commissaire travaille en étroite collaboration avec la police provinciale de l'Ontario et la ville d'Ottawa pour voir comment nous pouvons appuyer davantage leurs efforts. Des progrès ont été réalisés. Des accusations ont été portées. Hier, nous avons réuni une table pour que tous les ordres de gouvernement soient sur la même longueur d'onde. La ministre Blair aura plus à dire à ce sujet sous peu. I will just say that the conversation that we had with Mayor Watson yesterday, along with members of his senior staff and team, was very productive. We had an opportunity to unpack with a little bit more detail the request for additional resources that the OPS police chief slowly has requested of both the federal government as well as the provincial government. And I would just point out that the mayor also sent that letter to Premier Ford, as well as my counterpart, Minister Jones, with whom I've had a number of conversations, as has Minister Blair. I would point out that since the very beginning, the federal government has been there to provide whatever tools, whatever resources that we can to support law enforcement and the OPS. We need to see a fast and peaceful resolution to the convoy, and we will continue to keep open lines of communication, working with the city, working within all levels of government to get that done. Secondly, let me say a few words about the situation in Coutts, Alberta. While the crossing itself remains open, there continues to be significant blockades on Highway 4, both just north of the border at Coutts, as well as along at Milk River. Last night, I had a good conversation with Premier Kenney. One of the benefits of the police service agreements is that additional resources can be requested and temporarily deployed from across the country when there is an urgent and often unforeseen policing requirement, such as the recent protests. I was happy to let Premier Kenney know at the time that we would be approving a request for additional RCMP resources in the province under Article 9.3 of the Police Services Agreement, which of course will provide the province with some additional Mounties resources on the ground to ensure that supply chains continue to move. The provisions of the police service agreements provide surge capacity to meet extraordinary policing requirements that are beyond the normal day-to-day level of policing requirements. The blockade at Coutts has already cost our economy significantly, and we have to make sure that we end it before it causes further damage. And our commitment is to work closely with the Premier, as well as his team, my counterpart, Minister Savage, as well as the local RCMP who are operating as the provincial police of jurisdiction, and of course, our CBSA officers who are doing exceptional work on the front line. Finally, let me talk a little bit about the situation at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Ontario. At the moment, the blockade has prevented traffic from coming into Canada, while some traffic is still moving towards the United States. The CBSA is currently directing trucks and other commercial traffic to the Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia and sending cars to the Windsor-Detroit Tunnel. Traffic at both of those crossings is moving smoothly, and that is encouraging. We've added additional resources at these two ports of entry, as well as at other key crossings in southern Ontario. The Ambassador Bridge is one of the most important border crossings in the world, and it carries with it a significant proportion of all trade between Canada and the United States. And speaking personally and having spent considerable time in Windsor, I know just how important it is to the local community there, to working families, to the economy, that we keep those roads open and moving. And I can say that I've already had direct exchanges with Mayor Dilkins, with my colleague MP Kazmierczyk, as well as MP Brian Massey, who has reached out, and I look forward to speaking with him later today. And we will continue to work, again, very closely to see that this blockade is disengaged so that we can keep the supply chains moving across the Ambassador Bridge, as well as the wheels of our economy turning. I want to take a moment to thank all of the officials at the municipal level in that community, as well as our CBSA officers who are working in conjunction with Windsor Police. And I do look forward to, again, staying very much up to date on events in Windsor and making sure that we can see a resolution to this as quickly as possible. Je vais maintenant céder la parole à mon collègue de ministre Blair. Merci.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Mendicino. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us again today. I'm speaking from my home, which is located in the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit today. As Minister Mendicino has indicated, last night, Minister Mendicino and I met with Mayor Watson and officials from the City of Ottawa for what was the first meeting of the trilateral table. But I want to be very clear, from the very outset of this pandemic, the municipal, provincial, and federal authorities have been in your constant contact. I know my colleague and friend, Minister Mendicino, has been reaching out and has maintained a very close collaboration with his provincial and municipal counterparts throughout this, as has Minister Alghabra and other officials in our government. I also want to acknowledge and commend the extraordinary and excellent work of our senior officials within the federal government, working with their partners provincially and municipally in responding to the protests that have been taking place in Ottawa and the disruptions and protests that have taken place right across the country. As I mentioned yesterday, I also had the opportunity to speak with Minister Jones in Ontario about the proposal of establishing this table, because this type of an urgent situation demands close and continued collaboration between all levels of government. We all have a role and a responsibility for keeping, and we all work together in order to achieve that. We are working now to schedule another meeting for later today, and invitations have been extended to Mayor Watson, Minister Jones, and their respective officials. From the beginning of this pandemic, the RCMP, our Parliamentary Protective Services, and other federal partners have remained in close contact with the Ottawa Police Service, and we continue to act in coordinating roles between these agencies. I would also like to acknowledge the work, as I've done, of my colleagues, and in particular Minister Alghabra, who has been meeting with truckers and representatives from the trucking industry over the past many days. Organizations like the Canadian Trucking Alliance have made it very clear that the demonstrations in Ottawa do not represent Canadian truckers, nor is it how we should engage in meaningful discourse and advocacy. Minister Alghabra is also working with his provincial counterparts to explore what kinds of regulatory powers could be imposed to end these unlawful occupations and blockades. He has met with his counterparts in Alberta, and Transport Canada is in regular contact with the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario. To the people of Ottawa, let me acknowledge, we know that the past 12 days have been extremely difficult for all of you. We hear you, and we are doing everything we can to support the City of Ottawa, the Ottawa Police Service, and all our officials in ending this demonstration safely and as expeditiously as possible, so that things can get back to normal in our city and in your communities. And to Canadians in every corner of the country, let me acknowledge how frustrating this pandemic has been. We have all made sacrifices. Many families have lost loved ones throughout this pandemic, and every family has experienced the deprivations of the restrictions that were by necessity imposed upon us. It's impacted our businesses in our communities. It's impacted our kids who've been unable to go to school. I know how frustrating it is for every family that we haven't been able to engage in our normal activities, to be together, to celebrate, to travel internationally, and to go about doing the things that are so important to all of us. We understand and hear your frustration, and we share that frustration. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, this pandemic sucks, and it does for everyone. But at the same time, let us also acknowledge the remarkable sacrifice and resiliency and the work of our first responders, our healthcare professionals, people who have made this work. And I would also take the opportunity to acknowledge the truckers. You know, from the very outset of the pandemic, when we by necessity had to impose restrictions at our borders, we recognized the important work of the truckers in maintaining our supply chains. And they've done extraordinary work on behalf of all Canadians in making this work. The restrictions that have been imposed were necessary by the circumstances, but we share everyone's hope that as we emerge and as the science continues to evolve, that we will be able to return to a sense of normalcy. But unfortunately, the time is not yet there, but we're all working towards it. Let us acknowledge Canadians have been resilient. They have risen to the occasion. We have all made sacrifice, but so many Canadians have stepped up to help their neighbors and their communities, and we have been extraordinarily united in our response to support each other and in the face of this pandemic. I believe that we still have a little work to do, and I would ask Canadians to continue to support each other, to work for each other as we work towards the end of this pandemic and a return to a more normal life. These are the qualities, quite frankly, that make us who we are as a nation. They are the values that we all share. And I want to continue to encourage people. We acknowledge the frustration everyone feels. And we'll all work together in order to respectfully bring the country and Canadians through this incredibly difficult pandemic. With that, Minister Mendicino and I would be very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, merci. It is time for the questions. It will be one question, one follow-up per person. Everyone is on Zoom. And the first question goes to Emily Bergeron of La Presse Canadienne.
Oui, bonjour. Sur la table de concertation trilatérale, vous avez parlé d'une rencontre plus tard aujourd'hui qui est en train d'être programmée, cédulée. Quels sont les échéanciers là, que vous vous fixez pour le travail de cette table de concertation et quels sont les objectifs concrets, clairs que vous avez avec tout ça?
Well, if I may begin, Emily, and respond, and then, of course, I'll invite my colleague. As I've said, right from the outset, even in preparation for this protest, there has been good communication and collaboration between all three orders of government. We also have seen, and we've heard very clearly from Mayor Watson, of the need for his city and for his police service for additional help. And so we are formalizing that collaborative work that has been taking place from the outset by bringing together a regular meeting where these matters can be raised. We're also seeing as well, though, that the impact of the protest is extending even well beyond Ottawa and is in fact, for example, as Mr. Mendicino indicated, now disruptions at the Windsor Detroit border, at the Ambassador Bridge, and in other places right across the country. So we believe it's very important as well that we continue open lines of communication with all orders of government so that we can make sure that we all do what is necessary to support each other as we work through these issues.
Juste pour rajouter très rapidement que la table ronde est un forum où nous pouvons assurer que la ligne de communication reste ouverte pour chercher des solutions concrètes en collaboration avec la ville d'Ottawa. Hier soir, nous avons une très bonne discussion avec lui et son équipe. Mais comme la ministre Blair a dit, c'est un forum où pas seulement nous dans le gouvernement, mais même les membres et les leaders de l'équipe des services de policiers, le chef Slowly, le commissionnaire Lucky, même le commissaire de l'OPP peuvent rester en bon contact pour coordonner notre réponse sur le terrain.
Pour ma question de relance, je voulais vous entendre sur ce que M. Lightbound a dit ce matin. D'abord, je voudrais savoir comment était le ton des discussions à la table du Conseil des ministres dans la foulée de cette situation qui perdure à Ottawa, mais aussi des avis différents à la table peut-être du Conseil des ministres ou au sein du caucus de façon plus large. Et que pensez-vous plus spécifiquement de sa proposition de présenter une feuille de route pour l'éventuelle levée de restrictions sanitaires?
Bill, did you want to start or?
Yeah, by all means, Marco. But first of all, the focus of our government has, right from the outset, been on supporting Canadians and on helping Canadians, be safe and to work through this pandemic. And that's been the focus of all our discussions and continues to be. But I want to acknowledge, first of all, that we know Canadians are both frustrated and anxious about the future. And I want to assure them that we, with our officials, our public health officials, our public safety officials, the entire government is fully seized with our work in order to keep Canadians safe and to provide them with a clear roadmap through to the end and the management of this pandemic, and our commitment as well that we are always following the evidence, the science, the data, and the advice that we're receiving from our public health officials. We hear very clearly from all Canadians that they are anxious to see and understand a path forward, and we are absolutely committed to steering that path on behalf of the Government of Canada and the people of Canada, and also to communicate that to people. I think we all need hope, and we all need to acknowledge that Canadians have sacrificed a great deal throughout this pandemic, and they are all anxious to work towards a better future. We share that hope, and we're working hard to achieve it. Marco, I'd go back to you.
Non, pas beaucoup plus d'ajouter, juste pour dire que Joël est un collègue, est un ami, et je pense que tout le monde veut discuter avec lui son déclaration plus tôt aujourd'hui, mais dans le caucus.
Okay, next question, Marika Walsh, Globe and Mail.
Good afternoon, ministers. Thanks for taking our questions. Can you maybe elaborate on what specifically the federal government is doing to ensure that the Ambassador Bridge will be opened? When will it be fully back to normal? And what specifically is the government doing to ensure the speedy return to normal business there?
Well, I can take a first crack at that and then pass on to Bill if he has anything to add. But first and foremost, I would say I'm very familiar with the community there and know that the road leading to the Ambassador Bridge, Huron Church, is a vital artery for goods and services, and it is imperative that we keep traffic moving. The specific things that we can do are, again, to be sure that our frontline CBSA officers have all the tools and the resources that they need. And I can assure you that I spoke with President Nazowski of the CBSA earlier today, who said that they were going to be meeting with the Windsor Police so that they could be sure that those efforts are very much in sync, coordinating the strategies on the ground, finding ways and concrete solutions to keep traffic flow moving. And as you heard in my remarks, we have been able to do that periodically and intermittently, and at least there is some traffic flow right now going in one direction, and we're obviously looking forward to seeing it restored in both directions at the Ambassador Bridge. The second thing that I think that we can do specifically is to rely on our CBSA officials to divert traffic, including goods and services, to other ports of entry. And we are doing that both as well as at the tunnel at Sarnia at the Blue Water port of entry. So deploying those types of strategies will be critically important as we manage the blockade. I'll just say that in addition to the operational work, which again is very much within the expertise and the domain of our officials as well as the police, that there is a robust engagement of dialogue that is going on. between me and our colleagues within federal government and different orders of government. I've had a number of exchanges with Mayor Dilkens, whom I know very well. I've been in good contact with MP Kazmierczyk, who is one of the MPs from the Windsor area. And I've already had an exchange with MP Masse, and I look forward to speaking with him later on today. By keeping those lines of communication open and ensuring that we're getting the most real-time information about the state of affairs on the ground there, we can then relay that to our teams at the CBSA and really look to troubleshoot and to find practical solutions. So there are a couple of examples in which I think we're making some progress.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering if from that I should take, or we should take, that the government has no line of sight on when this will end. It seems like you don't have a timeline. If that's incorrect, please let me know. And I'm also wondering, you called it in your opening remarks, Minister Mendicino, a very small, angry minority, but we also know many Canadians want these restrictions lifted and want to see an end to some of these restrictions. So I'm wondering if by describing them as a small minority, you're allowing yourself off the hook to actually engage on this discussion of whether and when all of these health measures should be lifted.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very thoughtful and important question, and one that I'm giving a lot of reflection to, and I think everybody is. And, you know, frankly, it allows me an opportunity to, you know, impart to you my thinking about how important it is to disentangle the frustration that we all feel about wanting to get out of the pandemic, and delineating that from what we are seeing on the streets outside of Parliament Hill and what we are seeing at some of our official ports of entry. And, you know, my firm belief is that those who are taking that frustration and who are making life very difficult for the rest of us, those Canadians who have gotten vaccinated and who've made sacrifices, is listening to the darker angels of our nature as opposed to the brighter angels of our nature. And I think most reasonable and sensible-minded Canadians do get the distinction that we can all be exasperated with the pandemic and want to get back to life as normal, but not allowing that frustration to overwhelm us and to then succumb to either breaking the law or attributing ourselves to some of the extreme rhetoric that we have seen at the foot of the seat of the government of Canada. So I think far from you know, letting ourselves off the hook, I think we all share that common sense of motivation to find the fastest and most effective way out of this pandemic. And for a number of reasons, I think we've laid that out very transparently, that we believe in government, that's through vaccinations, and to the 90% who've gotten vaccinated, I think they agree too.
Okay, next question, Ryan Tumulty, National Post.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Yesterday, Mayor Watson and the Chief of Police here asked for 1,800 more officers, mostly police officers, as well as some civilian staff. I'm wondering if you can give us an update on that request. Have you figured out how to fill it? Will you be able to fill it? Is it practical?
Well, we had a good discussion with Mayor Watson yesterday where we allowed him an opportunity to expand a little bit on the letter that he sent, not only to the Government of Canada, the Prime Minister, myself, but in addition to that, to Premier Ford and to Minister Sylvia Jones. I just pause to really underline the significance of who he addressed that letter to, because the province has an incredibly important role to play through my counterpart, ensuring that the OPP are providing additional resources to the OPS, which they have done. And it is, I think, a moment for me to thank the members of the OPP as well as the RCMP who have stepped up, who have now been commissioned to enforce the law and to keep community safety locally here in Ottawa, and they're doing good work there. I think that we have seen good progress over the last day or so, but we need to see more progress, and I think more quickly, and I think that is a sentiment that we all share. As for the operationalizing of the details of the letter, we are going to continue to have those discussions, but they are properly within the expertise of the commissioner of the RCMP, the commissioner of the OPP, and the local police chief slowly. And at a very high line, I would just simply say that the federal government will do whatever we can to put the resources that the OPS and the city need to get this convoy ended as quickly and as peacefully as possible. And I'll turn it over to Minister Blair.
Very little to add to that, but thank you, Marco. I understand that officials require clarity on how those resources will be utilized, and perhaps greater clarity on exactly what number of and types of resources that will be required to assist the City of Ottawa and the OPS. I know that our officials are working that within policing, but also among our officials. Those discussions are quite appropriately and necessarily taking place. And at our table, our officials will then provide us with advice on the appropriate deployment of additional help to ensure that we provide what is required by the City of Ottawa.
Yeah, I guess just as a follow-up, that was a very vague response to a very specific question. The mayor and chief asked for 1,800 more officers yesterday. Is that practical? Is that likely? He says that is absolutely necessary to end this ongoing occupation of downtown Ottawa. So I'm wondering if you can be more specific about whether or not, either with the OPP or alone by the RCMP, you're going to be able to help with that request.
Well, let me give you a very concrete answer, Ryan. From the outset, the federal government, through the RCMP, has been proactive in providing a tangible, concrete support by assigning 275 RCMP officers who are now working closely with the OPS, the OPP to enforce community safety. And the work that they are doing is essential to disengaging the convoy and to ensuring that there's an upholding of the law here in Ottawa. Yesterday, we met literally within hours of having received the letter, wasting no time at all to make sure that we understood the exact precision and the parameters of the request. You're quite right. They put a bottom line on the additional resources that they need. And I know that today, the RCMP commissioner, the OPP commissioner are between themselves determining exactly how best to respond to that request. And as soon as we have an update on that front, we will provide it to you. The other thing I would say very concretely that we've covered now with the mayor on a number of occasions is that there are additional funds from which the city can draw to offset some of the extraordinary expenses which have been incurred as a result of the convoy. And that is another concrete solution to I think, making sure that the resources that the city needs are there. And I would just point out that this is important work, and that the point of being able to unpack this for you is not only to give you concrete, tangible examples of that work, but to demonstrate to you, to the people of Ottawa, and to all Canadians that it's all hands on deck, that we are working on this day and night, that there are good lines of communication across all levels of government and with all levels of law enforcement to bring about the fastest and most peaceful resolution to the convoy.
And Ryan, if I can also provide a little more precision, there are many precedents where a surge of police resources have been required in a jurisdiction in the past. The RCMP, the OPP, and police services right across Ontario have a long history of working collaboratively and supportive of each other where there is a need, and that's usually done under the leadership of both our public safety minister and the Solicitor General in the province of Ontario. That's why we're working hard to support those initiatives, but we also rely on clarity from our law enforcement officials as to what resources they require and how they'll be deployed and used. And so that work is ongoing, but there is many precedents where the number of resources that are required can be provided when necessary.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so let's try to get as many questions in as possible. Next is Glenn McGregor, CTV.
Thank you. Question for Minister Mendicino. Throughout these protests, we've seen some groups affiliated with the Freedom Convoy propose essentially a coup that would see them take power over the government. Last night, we heard at a press conference the organizers of the protest held, they proposed exactly that, forming a coalition with the opposition parties and possibly with the Governor General. Does that, in your view, change the nature of this protest? And also, does it change what the response could or should be from law enforcement?
Well, I'll say at the beginning that I think, again, Canadians would be troubled with anyone that associates or attributes themselves to the extreme statements that have been made by the purported leaders of this convoy that would seek to incite the overthrow of the government through violence. That is just simply inconsistent with the way that our democracy functions. And I sincerely hope that we're all watching very carefully those within our politics who are embarking upon that, because it is a very troubling path, one that I would discourage all of my colleagues to really not embrace. The second thing that I would say is that I think most Canadians get that. Most Canadians understand that there is a difference between being tired and fatigued with the pandemic and then crossing into some other universe in which you're trying to set up a parallel structure, which is, again, just not consistent with the way our proper functioning of government works. And so I think we need to be very clear-eyed and sober about that. While at the same time being singularly motivated to get people vaccinated so that we can get our freedoms. But in the meantime, just to be very, very sure that those who are not following the law are held accountable.
With respect to the discussions with the City of Ottawa about additional RCMP resources, can you give a little more detail on exactly who those RCMP members might be? Are these just regular frontline RCMP, or are they specialized in any way? We talk about tactical squads. If you agree to that request, who might we see on the streets of Ottawa in RCMP uniforms?
Well, in terms of the details and exactly who is being assigned and from what RCMP branch, I would direct you directly to the RCMP, just because they, as you know, Glenn, and you've been covering this now for some time, are responsible for operations. Our job, my job, Minister Blair's job, is to ensure that the RCMP have all of the tools, all of the resources that they need in responding to the requests that have been submitted to them from the OPS and the city. And again, we'll continue to work closely with them, as well as Mayor Watson and his team and our counterparts in the province, to see the most peaceful and quick resolution to the convoy.
Okay, next question, Travis Danraj, CBC.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Question for Minister Blair. Minister, I think everybody knows that you were the former chief of police in Toronto. I covered you often. I'm just wondering, the protesters that were coming last weekend, even before last weekend, said that they were going to stay. Like there were indications that they were going to stay put. And in a letter that was sent to the federal government and to the province yesterday, the mayor said that the Ottawa police have not been able to contain what he called an insurrection. I am just wondering if you think the Ottawa police failed here when it comes to containing this, and now we're into day 12, where the nation's capital is in a state of emergency.
Well, thanks, Travis, and it's good to see you again. And I remember those many times that you were asking me similar questions that you're now asking the chief in Ottawa. I'm very mindful, however, that under no circumstances is it ever appropriate for an elected official to be giving direction. And I'm not the minister that is responsible for policing in Ontario, and so that's not a question. It's not for me to pass comment or judgment on that. But it is our responsibility to make sure that the municipality of Ottawa has the resources that it requires. It's why we're working so closely together and working with the province of Ontario, because we all share a common purpose of serving the people of all of our communities. This has been hugely disruptive to the people of Ottawa. You know, on the one hand, I think, you know, we all respect that in our charter, people have the right to lawful, peaceful protest. But we've also seen many examples here where that protest has gone well beyond lawful and peaceful, and in fact is infringing on the rights of other Canadians. Even, you know, the activities that are now taking place at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, that's a vital artery of supply and services for the province of Ontario. It's absolutely essential to our economy. And you know, it's one thing to protest, but when that protest infringes upon and impacts so significantly the people of Ontario, I think it does require an appropriate response. That's why we have the laws that we have in this country, and it's why we give the authority of the police and the support and resources to the police to do the important job of keeping us safe and upholding the rule of law.
Travis, if I could, I'll just quickly add to Minister Blair's answer that I do think that there will be an opportunity, we hope in the very near future, to reflect on the way the situation has unfolded in Ottawa. It's been exceedingly difficult for people who live here, and I don't think we can gloss over that. And it's beyond just inconvenience, and it's beyond just disruption. People have been victimized repeatedly, daily, hourly. They're tired. They're at their rope's end. And this is not the way that we treat one another as we try to get ourselves out of the pandemic. So I do think we need to have the conversation about ensuring that this kind of situation never happens again in our nation's capital.
And just to pick up on that, Minister Mendicino and Minister Blair, maybe you can weigh in as well. Would you be supportive? Do you think a public inquiry should happen to look into how we got to this point? I mean, there's millions of taxpayer dollars that are being spent now on law enforcement. So would you be in support of a public inquiry in terms of how the city of Ottawa is at this point now?
Travis, I would sort of make the point that we're kind of embarking upon that in real time by coming out here and taking questions from you and your colleagues every day. But I think the longer term conversation does need to be had, that we do need to learn some lessons about the way that we prepare ourselves and are ready to respond to this kind of a demonstration, the kinds of blockades that we've seen here in Ottawa, and also to have that conversation relate to the parliamentary precinct from the perspective of both me and Minister Blair, and I think all of our colleagues who work on the Hill, and the concern that we have so that both transiting to and from Parliament, everyone feels safe. We need to have that conversation as well. But I'll turn it over to Minister Blair to add.
Yeah, and not much more to say except right now we're focused on bringing this to a peaceful resolution, and I think that's the important work that needs to happen. In the aftermath of any such event, it's always important that lessons be learned and applied. And exactly as Minister Mendicino said, we've been reflecting throughout this pandemic on ways, some of the challenges of the environment and how it's being managed, and ways in which we can do better. And so we'll apply those lessons and continue. But right now, quite necessarily, our focus is on bringing this to a peaceful resolution for the people of Ottawa and for all Canadians who are being impacted by this.
Okay, if we can squeeze in one last question. Palak Manga from Politics Today.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, Ministers. Thanks for taking our questions. Just on a different note, and I know that you were asked about this in French, but I'd just like to get your reaction to Mr. Lightbound coming out today and voicing his, I believe the word he used was discomfort around some of the divisive politics and tone that the party has taken dating back to the election. He's saying that there are others within caucus who feel similarly. I'd just like to see whether or not you share some of his concerns. Do you think that there are other MPs within caucus who could also be having these worries? And what does that mean, I guess, by way of confidence within caucus around the government's handling of the pandemic?
Marco, I'll jump in. First of all, I've been a member of the Liberal caucus now for over 6 years, and I believe that we are a caucus that listens to each other, and that there's plenty of opportunity for a wide variety of opinion within that caucus. I think more I reflect on, the broader anxiety and frustration that Canadians are feeling with respect to this pandemic. It's been very difficult for everyone. And I would just simply respond that we have all been working full out in, first of all, to keep Canadians safe and to take the steps that our health officials have advised and that we believe were the right thing to do in order to ensure people were safe. I think one of what is clear is that vaccination is an incredibly important part of keeping Canadians safe, and acknowledge that the overwhelming majority of Canadians, close to 90%, have now gone out and become fully vaccinated. We're going to continue to work on those things. And at the same time, we recognize that as we work through this pandemic and the situation continues to evolve, we share all Canadians' hope that we will be able to return to some greater sense of normalcy. Everyone is anxious to see that happen. We're anxious to see it happen too, and we're all working tirelessly to make it happen. And part of that is making sure that we provide, with our health officials and others, the supports that they need, access to vaccinations, and take the measures that will keep us safe. And at the same time, when the need for those measures begins to abate, we're always evaluating the necessity, because we recognize the impact that even our most important measures can have on all Canadians.
Oh, yeah, and sorry, and just to follow up, I believe this is probably for Mr. Mendicino. One of the things that Mr. Lightbound highlighted is the need to pivot and start thinking more longer term. And I do take your point, and I know that you said this on Monday as well, that when it comes to the protests and the situations that have been going on here, you're saying that there's a need to focus on the short-term goal of operations, so on the ground with law enforcement. But I guess my question is just, given now that we have one of your colleagues now publicly striking a similar message, does that place a sense of urgency on focusing on these longer term reflections sooner rather than later? And by extension, will there be some formalization of these talks?
I think we may have lost Minister Mendicino. Minister Blair, would you want to respond to that?
Yeah, if I may, and I'm sorry that technically we seem to have lost Minister Mendicino, and I know he would have wanted to respond to your question. In every circumstance, we have to deal with the immediate. The immediate impact of the protests that are taking place in Ottawa, the blockades that are occasionally popping up in Alberta and now in Windsor and in other places are urgent matters that need to be dealt with in an urgent way. And at the same time, I just want to assure everyone, including all Canadians, that we are also looking very carefully at the future and how we can bring the country through this pandemic and beyond, the circumstances we find ourselves in now. There is a long-term view, and all of our officials are seized with that responsibility. We recognize it, and as we have from the very beginning. We've heard from Canadians who were concerned about restrictions on international travel, their ability to see family and friends. The impact on some of our provinces have restrictions that they've put in place with respect to kids going to school, the impact on the business community. From the very beginning, we knew we needed to be there for Canadians, to provide the supports, financial supports, and other supports in order to support Canadians, but also to take the steps that were necessary to keep them safe. We have seen that we have made some progress in this pandemic. We've learned some lessons. The data, our public health officials work relentlessly to gather data and to learn from the experience of other jurisdictions and apply it here. And we are also hopeful that as we work through this, some of the restrictions that have been absolutely critical and necessary and successful in keeping Canadians safe, that we may have the opportunity to begin to ease those restrictions at the appropriate time, based on the evidence, based on the advice that we receive from our health officials. We're always seized by that. And we acknowledge the frustration, but I'll go back to the matter of urgency. When people express that frustration, and everybody's entitled to freedom of expression, but when they do it in such a way, it impacts on the lives and the safety, the health of other Canadians. The threats of violence, the intimidation, the symbols of hatred and intolerance that have been on display, even quite frankly, some of the delusional pontifications of people who think that they are perhaps more fit to take over the government. All of those things need, unfortunately, to be dealt with in the immediate, but we'll never take our eye off the best interest in Canadians. We are all focused and seized with that responsibility, and we're working through it.
Thank you very much. This ends this press conference.
Thank you.